Hi, I'm Angie, and I really wish that I could be here in person with you, but this morning I'm sitting outside in the morning as the birds end their morning call by the Winooski River in central Vermont, named for the wild leeks that are soon to come up out of the ground nearby here. I just wanted to share this beautiful story I came across recently. As a nature immersion specialist, my work has evolved into becoming an herbalist and working with teachers in public schools to implement the tea project, which is basically building perennial tea gardens, working with herbs and wildcrafting, and bringing those plants into the classroom during the long winters of our northern climes so that we can experience nature internally and accompany it with mindfulness practices and an awareness of the rhythm of the seasons. So I hope this story invokes something in you, really is why I chose it. More for the support of us as adults right now, and I don't think that any of this would be missed on children either. So, once upon a time, not too long ago or far away, but further than you would imagine, there was only a dark time in between the light times. And the place that this story comes from is filled with mucky, wet bogs where one might sink to the bottom, and it's filled with silt and soil, and otherwise just a composting place. A fen filled with moss where things become soil from what they once were. Now, the bog is full of dark things. And when the moon shines bright in the sky, the dark things hide and the people walk around. But when the moon is dark in the sky and new, the things that dwell in the bog terrorize all those who try to walk the bogs at night. There aren't singing people during that time, for they're way too scared to go out and about. And if they do, oftentimes they don't come back. But the moon, the mother that she is in the sky, she learns of this coming, and she is so in love with the people of the earth that she weeps for them. She feels such sadness in her heart that the dark things have to come out creepy crawly and terrorize them during these times when her light is dark. And so she makes a plan to descend from the sky and to be with her people in order that she might make an offering of help. For it feels so good and so right when one can offer what they're truly here to offer. So towards the end of the month, down she goes, down to the ground. She pulls her black cloak up and over her face. She buttons it down the front to cover all of the luminous light that pours out from her. And as she descends, all you can see are the stars in the little pools along the bog and two little bright white lights peeking out from under her cloak, her feet. Her tight cloak trembles. She does not know what's before her. And down she goes, landing on a little tuft of soil and grass right in the middle of the bog. But she loses her footing, and down she goes into the bog, reaching and grasping for something on the side, and all she can grab is a bramble bush, which pricks her hand surprisingly, and so she tumbles down even further into the dark, murky bog. As she descends, she finds that there's another bramble vine that she grabs onto for her life, trying to pull herself out. But the more that she pulls, the tighter the vine wraps around her, pulling her down under. She's scared. She's sad. She's lost, and she's lonely, and she's deep. In the midst of her sorrow at the bottom of the bog, she awakens to the fact that she thinks she hears a voice, a crusty old voice, calling to her. She realizes she needs to reach out and ask for help. She tries to free herself from the bramble, and as she does, and she whips her head around and her body so furiously, the vine that's holding onto her grabs even more tightly, but her black cloak falls back to reveal her beautiful white face full of light. She's looking up and the light extends from within the dark bog to outside of it, just enough that the owner of this crusty old voice comes near, noticing, hey, there's light down there? I was so scared. I was being terrorized by all these demons above, and well, there must be some light. The terrors were scared away and went back to their little corners. And the man walking towards the bog was so joyful and happy that he could see his way again, that he skipped off laughing in the middle of the night, knowing he was no longer lost, and finding his way back home, where he desired to go. He was joyful, and Mother Moon was so happy for him that she forgot to call out for her own help, watching him succeed and feeling so useful and helpful in offering him this light that she had from within her. Oh, she realizes she really messed up. She struggles and struggles, trying to call forth, trying to get out of the bog again. She knows this isn't her place. It was a mistake. And as she struggles, her hood comes up above her face once more, cloaking the light that came from her that called the man in. And all of the dark terrors that scared her decided, we hate her. She's our enemy. When her light comes out, she scares us away. And so, let's get her. So they go in and they terrorize her, and they pick on her, and they make fun of her, and they make really mean sayings come into her head. She's miserable. They screech at her. They howl that she is their enemy. She crouches even lower into the bog. She is cold. She's lonely. She's lost. All the time, the dark things argue now that they have suppressed the light of the moon. They lose time. They realize they're losing even more time, and they decide what we've got to do is just shove her deep down. They shove her deep down in the middle of the bog, and together with all their nasty old might, they roll a rock over top of the bog, and it covers it halfway so that the moon may never rise anymore. She's buried, and she has no hope. And for 2 days, the people are expecting her to come back. It's the time where she starts to grow in light again in the sky, and they're concerned. What's going on? They see no return of the moon. And they say, we need to seek the wise counsel of the wise woman who lives in the oak wood. And so they gather together and go off to find the wise woman who lives in the oak wood. They make their pilgrimage out to see her, and when they arrive, she greets them and says, how can I help you, my children? To that they share their story with her. They share that the moon hasn't come back, and they need her light, or everything will be magnified in the way that all the dark things will come back more and more, and it will get really terrible. We need her to come back, and we don't know where she is. Can you help us to find her? The wise old woman looks. She looks into her book. She looks into her brew pot, and she looks into her fire. She sits in quiet for a moment, and then she looks at the people and says, nah, I can't find her. I don't know where she is. I'm sorry. I can't help you today. And the people, sad and feeling dismissed, go back to their village together. Once they arrive back to their village, they're chatting amongst themselves, and there's a lot of forgetfulness that comes when people feel lost and they don't have the regular rhythms of their life. For instance, the moon. And so they're chatting together, and the man who once had visited the bog, being lost, he has a conversation that jogs his memory. And he says to himself, wait a minute. Wait, could the moon possibly be the light that was emanating from the bog that night that I found my way back? Is that possibly what that was? And so he gathers the people, and they go back to the wise woman in the oak wood. And he says to her, I think it might be possible, but I don't really remember, for I was lost, that the moon was the light emanating from the bog. But where is the bog, and can you help us? And the wise old woman in the stone hut in the oak wood looked into her book, and she looked into her brew pot, and she looked into her fire. "Ah, I can help you. I see now," she says. "I see the way. Listen closely." And she shared with them the way to the moon. It was a long way, and it was a mischievous way. For remember, all the dark things were out. There was no light to scare them into their corners. And so, the strong men gathered, and they had a woman leading them at the front, with a torch lit, shining the way ahead. And they wandered and meandered all the way through the woods, following the wise woman's guidance that she had offered them. And after a day of searching, they came to the bog. They saw the stone had been rolled over, half covering the bog, and there was just a small bit of light as the sun descended into the earth, setting for that day. As though a candle was burning out, there was this amount of light that was rising from the bog. And the man said, "This is it. Now I remember. Gather round, everyone." And the women and men all gathered round, and they pulled the stone back. And for a brief moment, when they recalled it later, they would have sworn that they saw the most beautiful, wondrous, shining face. But they could never be sure again, for it was in that moment that the moon lifted up from within the bog and shot into the sky, shining down on them in her full nature, scaring away all the creepy, crawling, monstery bogles and encouraging them back to their dark corners. In that moment, the people sighed a sigh of relief, for it was with the role model of the moon's light in the sky that they were able to feel the confidence and depth within themselves that they could believe in their own light. And that is the end of the story. So this story is called The Buried Moon, and it's an old Irish legend that was adapted by Sharon Blackie in a book I've been really loving called If Women Rose Rooted. And in that book she shares a lot of Irish legends. And this especially I love using because with my work, it's really important, as with all of our work, but I'm just speaking of like with plants. I love to raise an awareness of the rhythms of the earth through story. It's pretty, I notice the eyes kind of starting to wander off when I talk about theoretical ideas and don't have any sort of like wandering into that part of the brain that sits all the children around going, "Tell me more." I mean, when do you see their eyes looking at you like this in rapt curiosity, unless you are calling on this ancient process of the brain, the part of us that yearns for story. So I love telling a story and then popping in there a couple of plants. So we talked about blackberry, talked about raspberry, and oh, I forgot to say this part at the end that was the reason that I have this basket right here. So the real end of the story is that that all of the men carry with them an elder wand made out of the elder. Elderberry, elderflower, the elderbush. And so what I would do is I would have tools inside of here, and then at the end I would just start pulling them out, and I would have an elder branch which is hollow inside but filled with pith, and I would start whittling out in, you know, whatever level of students I have. I would give them tools where they could just sort of poke out the pith inside of the elder, and then we would have the opportunity to either, our lesson would be to find elder trees or to just work with the elder that I've already collected today and then go off to collect our own as a gift for someone later. But what's really lovely, and I learned this from an herbalist teacher of mine, Guido Mazet, is to hollow out the pith in the elder and then find some mugwort or artemisia, which is the dreaming plant and the plant of the moon, and to stuff bits of the mugwort inside of the elder wand and then find a special stone and tie off the stone on the end. Because in this way we put our intentions through this carrier for the intention, And that is what the men were doing at that time. That's what all the people were doing. The men were the carriers of the wands. The women were the carriers of the light in the story. And so at that point, I would just have this activity happening where if they wanted to, the kids could join in and make their own wand at some point. It probably could be a really nice intro for the day to say like, hey, what do you think? Maybe we could make our own elder wands if we can find some elder. So yeah, I would just have some tools in here that invoked curiosity, potentially not, and and then move forward with that through the day. Yeah, and just the inspiration of, hey, this story evokes the question, the moon covered herself with a cloak and then she shined bright. And I might send them home to say, hey, what's happening tonight? Is the moon covering herself with a cloak, or is she shining bright? Can you notice? Can you see? And then we start to recognize that the moon has a cycle and has rhythms. And when we're harvesting plants, that's really important because we plant seeds on the new moon, and the level of water and moisture level in a plant is much higher on the full moon than it is on the new moon. So we want to know that depending what we're going to be doing with the plants that we're harvesting. If we're going to be making tea with fresh plants, it's great to harvest them at the point where they are filled with lots of fluid. But if we're going to be drying them and we live in a really moist climate, then it might be nice to harvest around the new moon. And there's so many other factors with that, but this just starts to raise the awareness. Yeah, so thanks so much for sitting with me today, and I do hope to continue this journey with many of you in the future and sit and hear stories from you as well. Thanks so much, Kaylin, for putting this together.